right, well, it is 1 o'clock and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A session for this week. I'm Dave McCormick from Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined by our lead solution engineer, Dion McCormick, no relation. Today, Dion is going to be going over Alpha Anywhere version 4.3 features. Version 4.3 was released last week officially. For those of you who have been using the pre-release, it's now the official release, and we're excited to report on a whole slew of new features, which we're going to go over today. But before we get started, there are a couple of things I'd like you to know. First of all, today's session will be recorded, as are other sessions, and you can find them at videos.alphasoftware.com. The second thing is that this is a Q&A session, so we really encourage you to ask questions. The more questions, the better. Go ahead and type a question in right now into the GoToWebinar control panel interface. So let's get started. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter.
Thank you.
And I can see your screen, so take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're excited to have you here to talk about the brand new release. There's so much. It's a feature-packed capabilities. It's actually a broad release, meaning a lot of different areas have been touched in the system, and we can't wait to share that with you, along with tons and tons of little bug fixes and other things that come along with it. So if you haven't had a chance, check it out. It's awesome, and we'll walk through that in a few minutes. As Dave mentioned, we want to say thank you very much for joining us and taking time out of your schedule. Help us help you, and the way you can do that is go to your GoToWebinar control panel and feel free to enter in any burning questions you might have into the questions area of your panel. Always remember, if before our webinar, you can send questions to guides at guides at Alpha Software, GUIDES at Alpha Software, and that way we can queue items up. And we have actually got a couple presentations coming up that were driven by questions that came in through that email. So we want to say thank you to everybody who does that. With that said, we're going to announce some really cool upcoming events over the next few weeks, and Dave's going to go over that in a little bit later on there. But with that, I'd like to go ahead and dive into the 4.3 review. And again, during my presentation, please feel free to ask questions using the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. So we're very excited about it. As Dave mentioned, it was released last week, and we have it's the official release 4.3. So as Alpha continues to grow and expand and increase the capabilities, we're having new release. This is a major release which rolls in all the pre-release functionality and bug fixes over the last few months. So this is a nice, stable, well-tested release ready to go, and we're very excited about that. And what we're going to focus on today is you can go into the release notes and find a lot of the things that have been fixed, enhanced, etc. But we're going to focus on those key new features that are now available with the 4.3 release. And I've broken them into different segments or areas. So depending on what your interest level, hopefully we'll touch on something that's of interest to you. So first and foremost, there was a lot of really cool user interface capabilities. First and foremost is the new control bar user interface element that has been added to the UX control. And I'm going to show a little bit more about that today, and we have an announcement that in 2 weeks we're going to have a deep dive on that with Selwyn. Dave, do you want to go ahead and talk about that? I'd really like to let him know that we're going to touch on it today, but you're going to see much more in the near future.
Sure, and you'll all get a separate invite to this, but it will happen during our regular Wednesday webinar time. Selwyn Ribbons, who's our chief engineer here and lead designer and co-founder of the company, is going to go over the control bar builder. So the new control bars are basically a feature that lets you build the controls that appear at the top and the bottom, usually mobile interfaces, but also web interfaces. And they allow you to spawn new menus, open disclosure dialog boxes, and really do quite a lot more. Often they'll be used to launch maybe a search function. It's sort of a modern way of designing applications. We made it really easy to implement that. And Selwyn will be taking you on a tour of how it works and how to build your own. And that'll be 2 weeks from today. Again, take a look for an invite in your email box, which should be coming up pretty shortly.
Excellent, excellent. Along with that, actually, I'm going to fix this. That north winds. Okay. There we go. Real-time, editing as we go. Secondly, we reviewed this last time, but the new alpha template is now built into 4.3 and available. This template is optimized for mobile and desktop apps. It's a very nice, clean template and is an excellent starting point for the look and feel of any user interface that you're developing. It uses the new SVG icons. And again, we had a presentation about 2 months ago or so where we showed how you could include the SVG icons. Well, Alpha now has those built in, meaning that we already have a preset set of SVG icons that are now in the solution that allow you to select those for buttons and controls and whatever you happen to use from an image standpoint. And what's nice about that is now that they're built in, you don't have to go through the process of going out, finding them, and bringing them in. Now, that said, you still have the ability to go out and download SVG icons, icon libraries, and bring those in. And the beauty of that is there's some really nice ones which we've shown before for different industries. Like let's say you're doing a medical app. There's a whole series of icons focused on medical or delivery or field inspection, etc., or even telecommunications, whatever it happens to be. So we have our pre-built-in SVG icons, which you can use right out of the box, and they're beautiful and they look awesome. I highly recommend you start using SVG icons versus Font Awesome or Material font icons. There's a huge amount of advantages with SVG, specifically in terms of look and feel modification and scaling that you get with those. So definitely as you move forward, really look at using those for your icons. You won't regret that decision. Also, included in the release is our Sass variable editor. And again, we did a demo of that a week or two ago, and it's tightly integrated with the Alpha template. And I can show you a few of these things really quickly, where to find them. But the beauty of that is now you can take our basic templates and use the Sass variable editor to make quick modifications to bring it in line with the style that you're looking for a specific client, for your company, for the kind of design you're putting together. And what it's going to really do is put the more and more power of design into the hands of the programmers so that they can move quickly and be able to make adjustments with that. And then, why does that? Oh, I know what's going on. Why? Okay. See, it wants to do the spell check. That's not my fault. Then last but not least is that, and this is, I guess, kind of part of the user interface element, is that often we use the Northwind as an example database. And built into it, and I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, is that we've got a new methodology to deploy the Northwind's content and data so you can build demos, you can use our training content, our samples, etc. What's really neat about that is you won't require to use an Access database, which we did in the past. And that's a really, really handy capability there. Now, a lot of changes in the database area, and a lot of very powerful changes that are really going to improve the overall integration with database. First, Redis is a popular key value paired database. Think NoSQL type database. That is now fully supported in Alpha. Secondly, we now also support what's called SQL Server Local DB, and that's related to the Northwinds. Basically, the neat thing is that's you don't have to install all the SQL Server stuff to get it to work. So more and more you'll see Alpha will be deploying our sample databases, sample data sets using this technology, and it's a very small, low footprint built in, so you don't have to worry about Access drivers or having MySQL or whatever installed. We really are excited about that from a training and example tutorial basis, including the ability to automatically generate those databases on the fly right on a development machine. Alpha, when we included the SQL Server Local DB, one other key thing we added was the whole series of APIs that are now built into the Alpha X Basic, so you can actually use it yourself to build local DBs and on the fly create databases, enter information in it, etc. And we'll probably do a full dedicated review of that capability in the near future, because it opens up a lot of really interesting potential items there. Next, which is very, very interesting and very, very cool, is what is called TSL SSL drivers for SQL. And this may be new to some people may be already familiar with it. But what this is, and it's now been added in the 4.3 release, is the system encrypts the data between Alpha and the database. So before, what would happen is you could encrypt the data between the client and the application server with something like SSL, but when Alpha talked to the database, that communication was not necessarily encrypted. And more we're starting to see, especially with the launch of our Alpha Cloud product, that you will have the application server on one machine and your database on another machine. And when they're communicating before, if you're not using TSL, SSL drivers, that information is not encrypted. So literally someone could snoop on the data flow from your database to the application server. Well, now with that release, you don't have to worry about that. With the supported databases such as SQL Server, Oracle, etc., there's a list of those that will be coming out with us. What will happen is when Alpha makes a request to the database, it encrypts it, and when the database gets that, it decrypts it, performs it, and then returns the result in an encrypted fashion back to Alpha, and then Alpha decrypts that and then has that available. So you're going to find that that's very powerful in terms of going to an end-to-end secure method for your application and your data, and we're very excited to be able to add that into the facility, and that is, again, for supported databases. The TSL, SSL drivers are now available for those. Along with that, also, Alpha has implemented HSTS, which is a much more secure HTTP transaction protocol that is becoming more and more the standard for higher security environments. So that, and along with all of these changes, Alpha has, the version 4.3 has earned an A+ rating from the Qualys SSL Labs. And Dave, if I don't mind putting you on the spot, if you could talk a little bit more about what that means, and how that impacts would be great.
Yeah, sure. Qualys SSL is a service basically that goes and tries to find vulnerabilities in web services. It's sort of a well-known and well-respected lab. And what we did was we set up a web server using the version 4.3 features. So that includes the HSTS, secure drivers, and had it patched up. Basically the same version that you get from us when you download the current build. And it earned us an A+ rating. It went through and made sure that we were up to date. So we're actually very, very proud of that. We'll have a little bit more about that in an upcoming blog post. But actually, quite a few commercial sites don't earn A+. So it's good to know that you really can be super secure when you're using an Alpha server.
Absolutely, and more and more we're seeing financial institutions pick up Alpha and use them, banks and other institutions. Also, we're starting to see more and more medical type applications being built on top of Alpha, and all of those have very high, those companies have extremely high concerns about the integrity of patient information or bank customer information. We're talking about personal information on financial and other pieces there. And so what's great about this is that when you're developing solutions on top of Alpha, you can feel comfortable that Alpha is doing everything in our power to create a very secure, safe environment so that you can deliver that kind of safety and security to your end clients or to your company as you build on top of Alpha. And a lot of work goes into this kind of plumbing kind of elements here that sometimes you won't even see. It's just happening beneath the covers there, but it's all built around making you as a developer, you as a company using Alpha very successful and to be able to create very secure applications using the technology. Last, we also, or not least, but we also have some incredible enhancements in the mobile area. First and foremost is PhoneGap Shell version 2.1. This is crazy. Actually, for people who've been doing PhoneGap, the original PhoneGap Shell was a huge benefit. It allowed you to do much faster development using Alpha. Instead of going through the build process every time, you could place the shell on top of your on your mobile device and then connect to the development machine and use it to then download and work it or then test it without having to go through the whole build cycle. And that turned out to be an incredible productivity boon for our developers. And so along that lines, I believe Bob Moore has really been driving the initiative here along with the team, is that we've enhanced the PhoneGap shell enormously. And there's going to be, actually Dave has put together a great document that will be going out to everybody that will allow you to see a little bit more detail of all the stuff behind this here. But what's very, very powerful about the PhoneGap shell is it's using our new alpha style. It can do full screen now. Before there was some limitations around that. You can also use what's called multiple server addresses. Before, what you would have to do is build the PhoneGap shell and then encode in that the server address, i.e. your development machine, and then therefore if you were went to a different location or used a different machine or whatever, you had to rebuild it. So now you can basically have dynamic server addresses, so you can be pointing to wherever you need to point on that from stamp. You can edit component names. Now you can use QR codes to scan information. There's also an increased list of PhoneGap plugins that are defaulted in the shell. So as we go along, we're making the shell more and more, let's call it robust, has more capabilities, so therefore you don't have to worry about that aspect from there or building your own. It fixes the dreaded Android back button. As you can see, you should see what popped up on your screen there is the handout for the Alpha Anywhere version 4.3 features, and I want to say thank you to Dave for working with the team to put that together. It's a great synopsis of everything we're talking about today, so make sure to download that, keep that handy. But very excited in terms of that capability. Let's see, make sure. Dave, just process check, everything coming through okay?
Yes, it sure is. Thanks.
Okay, good. Good. Just want to make sure. So the PhoneGap shell is a big step forward, and really, if you're doing any PhoneGap, download it, start using it. You're going to find all the enhancements are going to make your life a lot easier and to do that. Along with that is what we call the PhoneGap plugin. For people who have been building PhoneGap applications with Alpha, which is a lot, often they'll have their own plugins that are not part of our default plugin set that they want to manage and include in their applications. So the PhoneGap build process has been enhanced, so you can create your own plugin. You can manage groups of plugins that are going to be used for your particular, like your favorite plugins or your custom ones that goes for there, which is really, really cool. Secondly, and this is not really PhoneGap, is now we can use what's called application cache. And this is the idea of deploying more robust mobile apps with without PhoneGap. So previously, there were really two kind of ways to go to deploy on mobile apps. First and foremost, you could place your solution up on the server, and then the users could use their mobile web browser to connect to the server and then engage with that app and work with it. And it provided offline capability and a lot of flexibility there, but the downside is that there were certain limitations that were involved with that because of the web browser scenario. Now what's really neat, and then the other option was then to do a full PhoneGap build. Now the other option is to use application cache, which is a capability where the mobile browser can actually download the whole thing as an app that is on the local phone, and with that you get more stability and more capability. And there's some great videos in the release notes that go through and show you how this could work, but what that will allow you to do is to create more robust web-delivered applications without having to use PhoneGap if you don't have a requirement for the PhoneGap capability. So that's a really neat feature, really powerful. It kind of gives you another tool in your toolkit to be able to deploy things, very sophisticated applications, but in a simple and fast and easy way. And then another little one which I find is very valuable based on our training is calculated values on a form view control, meaning that you can take a form view control which allows you to connect to a list and view and edit data. It's very, very powerful there. But now on that form view, instead of just showing static data from the list, you can now put calculated values on there, which is really nice for financial applications and other applications that need that dynamic element to it. So the form view control, which is really now our primary tool for displaying detail information versus the detail view, is enhanced and increased from there. And there's a whole bunch of other awesome stuff, man. Those are the big hits, but man, first and foremost, which is a huge time saver for me, is saving and restoring list settings to quickly define new lists. Meaning that before, when you created a new list, you pretty much had to create one from scratch. Now, if you've kind of configured a list the way you want it, you can essentially, like a template, you can save and restore those list settings. So now creating lists is going to be that much faster, and it will enhance your development feeling, or your development process and the speed of development there. Along with that also, we now have Google Address Autocomplete. This is very similar. Previously we had the ability where you could use Google to geocode addresses, so we built in all the capabilities, so it was just click, 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 and you could do that kind of function. Now you can have Google Address Autocomplete. And you're probably seeing this on most websites. When you start typing in your address, you all of a sudden get a drop-down of addresses that are like, wow, it's my address. And then when you fill it out, it fills out the rest of the fields. Well, what's going on there is basically you're hitting against, in most of those, you're hitting against the Google has this big cache of addresses, and it's just doing a search to kind of refine it to it. So instead of you having to do that now, you can just use the Google Address Autocomplete that's built into Alpha, and that was driven by one of our projects we're doing for a client. And it's really nice, and you're going to get better data quality. People love it because they can start typing in any address anywhere, and it automatically starts narrowing it down to what would be your city, state, etc. You can also use Ink on a data-bound UX component, which is very, very powerful. We also have the new Twilio Action JavaScript. So for people who haven't used Twilio, Twilio is a third-party service that allows you to send out SMS to phone and other capabilities there. So in this case, you can literally drop an Action JavaScript on there, put in your Twilio account, and start sending out SMS messages, and their rates are incredibly low. It's a very, very powerful JavaScript, Action JavaScript. And again, no coding necessary from there. Another thing, if you're doing more JavaScript stuff, is Alpha has added the JavaScript library. What this is I did a demo of this and actually went through it probably about 3 months ago, where in XBasic you can actually take little code snippets and save them into a library. So if you reuse this code over and over again in the developer, you can then highlight that text, save it to the code library, and then when you need it, you could drop it right in there. And now that feature is now available in JavaScript. So if you have a little JavaScript command or function that you use over and over again, then you're good to go. You just right-click, put it in there. And the one I'm going to use a lot is the panel set activate. I use that all the time. So now I kind of have to draw it out. Now I can put that in my library and have that's available there. And last but not least on my list is Node.js enhancements. The team is continuing to improve the integration between the Alpha application server and the Node.js environment. So before there were sort of these manual techniques you had to go through to kind of connect the pieces together, and now Alpha has automated a lot of those pieces, so it's easier and easier to use Node.js in your applications. Very important for people who are Node users, but also something that you should look into. As it becomes easier to use Node.js, Node has this massive library of pre-made what are called modules that let you connect to many services that are out there. And so there's actually Node.js is a very simple way to connect into third-party services, because usually those third-party services provide you what are called Node modules, and all of it's pre-designed with sample code. So now we're making it easier and easier for you to do that. Before there were some manual steps, and the team realized that they want people more and more to use it. And the nice thing about Node.js is it's highly supported. There's a lot of Node.js programmers out there who can help you out, and there's a lot of sample documentation, third-party APIs that are built into it. So I anticipate as we move forward, we're going to get a lot of use out of that Node.js capabilities, which is very popular. It uses JavaScript as the coding, so there's a ton of people who know how to code it, and it's just becoming more and more popular in the overall market there. So as you can see, there is a lot of stuff in the 4.3. Quick recap is that we have a lot of really cool user interface. I'm going to talk a few more minutes on the control bar just to give you a feel for that, and we have someone who's going to come up and give you a deep dive in a couple weeks. But that one's huge. We have all the new templating SVG and the variable editors. Our database structure has been extended extensively, especially in regards to the security side of it. Just a big leap on it. And one of the things that's interesting, and just to mention a little bit about that, we are getting a lot of interest in the Alpha Cloud product. This is the new service from Alpha that allows you to basically use the Alpha Cloud to spin up servers, and so you don't have to set everything up yourself. But one of the key requirements was not only do you need to spin it up, but where are you going to put your data? A lot of people want to keep their data within their corporate firewalls, etc. The new security capabilities allow us to do that in a much more efficient manner. So that's been driven by a lot of those requirements, which are very, very successful. Along with that, we have our new PhoneGap Shell v2, which will make your PhoneGap development much easier, along with the plugin manager, the application cache, and a lot of little enhancements such as the restoring lists, a Google address, Twilio, etc. So we're very excited about the breadth and the depth of the capability of the 4.3. Go ahead if you have any kind of quick questions on there, put those in. But I want to spend just 2 or 3 more minutes talking about the control bar just to kind of give you a feel for where it's going from there. So with that, I'm going to dive into that next. So the control bar, this is one of the most significant enhancements to the mobile app development design, and it can be used on desktop web. It's not limited to mobile, but it's really primarily focused on the mobile to allow you to dramatically increase the functionality and I think mimic a lot of really best practices out there with mobile. And the other thing about the control bar that I really think is just kind of indicative of the Alpha development group is that it really solves a pain in the tail kind of problem. So you know, here's the heart of it. In your mobile applications, you usually have a header and a footer. And in there you'll have a series of icons, you'll have other pieces there. And we have always had the ability to put what's called a panel header and a panel footer in there. But it was always a bit of a kind of, I don't want to call it kludgy, but you know, manual process to add icons and buttons into that, to distribute them, to make them look good, there. And then more importantly is within there you had to add a lot of functionality to say pop up a search area and do other pieces there. So the development team looked at that problem and said, first, our developers are spending a lot of time just laying out headers and footers you know, to make them more functional, and that was a very time-consuming and difficult process just because of the nature of the way it was working. So they said, listen, what if we give them a better tool to make it easy to lay out these things? And then along with that process, they said, well, you know what? There's so much more you can do with these headers and footers in terms of disclosure forms, search bars, etc. Let's give them a lot more power to make those things easy to do. And they have accomplished it. So from the very simple ability to kind of put together a header, you can then now have in there drop-down boxes. You'll notice a little little caret looking down, so I can create these nice-looking, you know, navigation buttons along with action buttons. So as you can see, there's a navigation button on the left, and then you have like a download button, then a delete button, and then on the right you have actually a button that will show a menu that goes in there. Now you can also have some very powerful structures. So like if I hit that down menu, now I can have this semi-transparent button bar or icon sort of menu pop down over it that allows me to have all these other kind of things. And to do this manually was very time consuming. It took a fair amount of time. You had to set in new panels and align things and do all that stuff. Now these kind of interfaces are going to be very simple for you to do. And what's really cool, because of the limited real estate on a mobile phone, this kind of really powerful pop-down transparent menu allows a very intuitive and simple way for your users to interact with your solution. So what you're going to do is you're going to actually have your users love you because they're going to have more natural, delightful ways to interact with your application, and they won't get overwhelmed with kludgy kind of interfaces from there. But we're not limited just to the header. You can also put in really cool control bars at the footer of your application, maybe showing what part of it. So before we had the tab bar with tab buttons, now you can have much nicer looking icons, and these are all SVG icons with nice coloring in there. So they again get a much more refined and slicked interface versus what we saw before, which were little standard buttons and other things like that that go from there. Also, we can have very powerful drop-down menus. and these can all be dynamic menus that are done. So instead of having a bunch of static, that classic hamburger little icon that opens up your menu there. And also you can include very powerful other controls in our, so for instance, you can include actually a list box that will pop up and show you from the control bar. Thus making, again, the idea of I'm on one record, I want to pop to another one, I don't necessarily have to navigate back up. I can just hit my top level and it will show me a list control. And this could be a list of records, this could be a list of items I need to go after. I mean, the sky's the limit. Very, very powerful from there. And last but not least is we have some very powerful abilities to use the control bar to notify the user. So you can give these very nice, slick, professional notifications to the user. So for instance, let's say your system is doing a processing step where it's calling back and running some queries or doing something that's going to take a few moments. You can have the control bar open up a wait, essentially, dialogue that shows them what's going on there. Or let's say you needed to notify them saying, hey, there's a message for you, and you can click the OK to close it. And last but not least is some kind of confirmation message where basically when they do something, it's like, do you really want to delete this record or something like that? So it extends beyond just icons. The control bar has this breadth of capabilities that is now available to you, and therefore that very valuable real estate, because that piece of real estate right there is often underutilized and is incredibly valuable. And now the more you can do with that, the cleaner the rest of your application can be. You don't have to have a whole bunch of pages with buttons, and you don't have to have buttons embedded in lists and other things like that. You can have these nice, very powerful capabilities that display on demand using both the header and also the footer that provide the user, and they're very dynamic. They have actions that are associated with them, so that allows you to easily use Action JavaScript to create behaviors when people touch on items, etc. Just a breadth, and this just kind of was to give you a feel for what the control bar can do. When you see Selwyn walk you through how easy it is to develop these very sophisticated user interface elements, you'll be very excited. And anybody who's struggled to put together a header with some buttons and tab stops and stuff like that, you're really going to enjoy this. And they're all responsive. So if I'm working on an iPad there, the control bar is a responsive control, so it's going to make everything look really nice. It's going to consume the whole top of it and make things really sharp and be able to be dynamic in terms of if I'm on a phone, this is kind of how I'm structured. If I'm on a tablet, maybe I throw some more icons in my control bar. All of that is available within the technology from that standpoint there. So that's kind of where I want to put a stop. If there's questions on where to find some of this stuff, I have the new version up and running. I can kind of show you where to find these elements there. But more importantly, I'd like to open it to the greater folks for questions about the 4.3 releases or other questions you may have.
Great. And actually, if I could point out one thing.
Oh, yes, please.
The screen you're showing right now is actually using a new control, I believe the control buttons control, which is part of the bar builder, which actually lets you specify that you want that line underneath, for example, the graph, or that you want it to be highlighted in a different color, and is aware of the states of each one of the buttons. So you don't have to program that in JavaScript yourself. Not that it's the hardest thing to program, but it's much easier to let the system do it for you.
Yeah, I mean, and what's interesting is I'm seeing an extremely high adoption rate with my mentorees and people that on the control bar, because they see it, they start playing with it, and they're like, okay, we're done. It's going in my app. So now that it's officially part of the 4.3 release, that makes me a lot more comfortable. But I'm seeing a heavy adoption because it solves a very solid problem and extends the capability enormously.
Great. So yes, we do have a few questions about the new features and a few other questions as well.
Sure.
Let's dive in. The first big one is, so can we upgrade to version 4.3? Is it safe to do so right now? The answer is yes. It has made it thoroughly through beta, and it's ready to go. It is the release version, and we are standing behind it. So it is no longer release version features anymore.
Oh. And whenever I hear
that, it came out last week. We did issue one patch right after that, but it's good. So I'd say Go ahead.
And I'll tell you, whenever I hear that, I can only think of Marathon Man. Is it safe? Is it safe? But it is very safe and very well tested and been hammered in a lot. These features have been, again, extensively, utilized and worked on, and we're very excited about the stability.
They're used in real applications actually before they even make it out of.
Yeah.
Another question we had was about the Android back button and about how it's handled in the new PhoneGap, how it's handled this release, and it's used in the new PhoneGap shell, which is one of the templates that is included with Alpha Anywhere. And actually, we'll show you how to get to that shell in a moment. But when you press the Android back button, it used to be that if you were in an Alpha application, what it would do is it would just bounce you right out of that application and back out onto the home screen, unless you had written code yourself to trap that. So what we've done in V2 is we've actually written that code for you, the PhoneGap shell V2. And so it checks for, so when you hit back, instead of it going back to the home screen, which is something you don't want, it'll go back to the previous page of the PhoneGap shell screen, kind of what you do want. But it also takes into account certain things that you may have done in the meantime. For example, is there a menu open? Is there a disclosure box open? And what happens? It closes those down and it moves back. You still have control over it, but in this case, we've really given some thought to what's that button supposed to do. So instead of just simply disabling it, we thought about, hey, how's it supposed to work? So it's really worth checking out the new PhoneGap Shell V2 and see how we've implemented that. So if you could actually just show us real quick, Deanne, where you can find the PhoneGap Shell V2. It's one of the templates, one of the UX templates, but it's something that people ask.
Absolutely. So I've popped over into my Alpha development environment. I'm using Mac, so I'm running it inside a virtual machine, and here's my Alpha there. And what I do is when I'm at the Web Projects Control Panel, I click New, and then I click Web Component. It is of type UX. It's basically a UX component there. I click Next. And now we have in here a whole set of templates that are available. So let's show you two of them. One is we have our original PhoneGap shell here, and now we have our PhoneGap shell V2. By the way, you can create your own UX component templates if you ever want to, but these ship now with 4.3. So if you're creating the PhoneGap shell V2, you just merely have to click on PhoneGap shell V2, click OK, and it will pre-create your UX component with everything, with all the code that's involved with it, any JavaScript functions, everything else. Notice the new on Android back button. We actually capture it, and we fire a pre-written piece of JavaScript that handles all that for you. So this has all been pre-built and ready to go. You really don't have to go. And then you can literally go through and build this into PhoneGap and then deploy it on your phone and have all the features and capabilities that are available that you need from there. So as you can see, there's really, off to the races from there. The other one I'd like to point out, which is now in it, is I'm going to go to Web Component, UX, and we also now have Mobile App Framework Panel Navigator with tab buttons using control bars. Now, this was my go-to all-time favorite mobile for every demo I did was Mobile App Framework Panel Navigator with tab buttons. But now what they've done is re-implemented that using control bars. So now if I click OK, which I'm very excited about, we now have a panel header here with a control bar and a panel footer with a control bar. So I can literally run this, and you'll see when I go into working preview, it shows it up. So now I have my control bar up top. Notice the behavior. A, it's using SVG icons. B, it's got a hover over action. And you'll notice I even have a hover over down here. So now when I select one of these, it's just moving from panel to panel. So it's very similar in behavior, but now we're using, instead of tab buttons, just to show you what the previous one looked like and what you can expect to see in terms of, you can see, after you see this, you'll see why people are so excited about this. If I go and do the original one, I'm going to be sad, I used it so much, and I do a working navigator, or working preview, you'll see that we had, this classic kind of these buttons here. And they worked great, awesome, did the job. But now you have these beautiful, nice icons that have the little, like, I can tell what's been selected with the bar. And then I also have this powerful control bar where now I have a pop-down menu where I can say, oh, I'm selecting menu 4. And by the way, this is just some sample code to help you understand how it's being fired from that standpoint. And if I go in there, you'll see that all of that functionality is contained in these two small little pieces. So another really powerful thing about control bars is that now instead of having like 5 or 6 different stuff up here and separate panels and stuff like that, I now have a much cleaner design environment using the control bar concept. And again, I'm not going to go into it deep, but if I open this up, it basically now brings up my control builder where I have some HTML, I have my menus and my menu items, and I'm doing all of this now through a Genie interface instead of having to do that. And in fact, I've got this fabulous preview aspect where I can literally preview everything of how it's going to look like inside here. And so you can quickly preview and edit it. And again, I'm not going to steal the thunder, but it's really powerful. And let's go to the control bar below it. And let's take a look at that. You'll see I have the new button list control right here, and I can preview this, and you'll see I've got my button list here. And so I do all my editing of this inside here, so if I want to add things there. And again, once you get a mastery of this builder, you now can create very fancy, very easy to use interfaces and not have to junk up your UX with a whole bunch of hidden panels and other stuff like that. And there's actually things that would have been almost impossible to replicate using the old method that you can do in control bars very easily, because Alpha has looked at those design patterns and built them into it. So definitely spend some time investing in the control bar. It will be an investment that will pay off enormously in terms of your mobile applications. And again, I want to state, we focused all this on mobile, but there's nothing to say you can't use this control bar concept for desktop web applications as your main menu or items there. And there's just, since they're dynamic in nature, there's so many powerful ways you can use them for both desktop web and mobile interfaces. So I want to make sure you don't hear mobile and say, oh, okay, no. Definitely check it out. For your desktops, you might find some very, very cool ways to use it to make your desktop apps even more powerful and more compact and more user-friendly.
Right. That's great. So another new feature we had touched on earlier was the app cache. Oh, by the way, am I coming through okay? I was told I was a little quiet the last time.
It sounds okay to me.
Audience okay? Okay, cool. So the question was about the application cache method of launching or deploying applications. And basically it was, I'm just going to quickly summarize sort of 4 questions from different people. The first one was, does it work with iOS and Android? The answer to that question is yes. Another one is, does it work offline? So if you don't have an internet connection, can you still use the application cache method of deploying an app? The answer to that one is yes. The other one is, will it allow you to embed components and be able to render those components also offline? The answer to that is also yes, you can do that. But there are some caveats. First of all, if that application did require some sort of server call, then that, of course, is not going to work. But just to quickly explain how it works is when you decide that you're going to make the application cache method of, say, deploying, let's say, one or UX control, you'll end up creating a set of files along with a manifest file. Now this happens all behind the scenes. You don't have to touch it. But all you do is you give the URL where you place these files to the person who wants to install your application. And by install, all they're really doing is just going to a web page. Once they're on that web page, they can then bookmark that page, or if you're on a phone or even on a desktop browser, you can make a shortcut and pin it to your home menu or to your desktop. Now, in the past, if you had done that and you weren't using the application cache, everything would be fine. It would be a regular mobile application. But if you went offline, the application would stop working, and that's because there's code built into those pages which basically asks it to hit a server and reload every time you open up the application. Using the application cache method, we go and check first, automatically behind the scenes, to see whether or not you have a server connection. If you don't have a server connection, it's going to use all of the files that it's downloaded, and it knows which ones because of this manifest file I was telling you about in the background. And it's going to use them all, and the application will continue to work. So that means you can open it up when you don't have signal, or you can continue using it when you lose signal. Now, when signal is restored, it can work like any other offline application, and you can do synchronization with it. And also when signal is restored and you open it up, if you have a new version of the application up on a server, it'll pull down the new version of that UX, so it'll update your application. Now, this sounds all great, but, of course, there are trade-offs, and here they are. The first thing is, keep in mind this is still a mobile application, so you're not getting the benefits that you would get if you were using PhoneGap. If you want to do barcode scanning, for example, you can't do that with this type of application. You would still need to wrap it in PhoneGap. If you wanted to do some of the more advanced audio or video capture, often those require PhoneGap plugin components, so again, not appropriate for this sort of thing. And probably the biggest limitation of the app cache method is that you have limited storage in local storage. It doesn't have access to the file system. It has access to about 5 megabytes of space. So for many applications, if you're just doing text and numerical entry, searching, sorting, entering, sort of CRUD operations, that's fine. But when you start bringing in multimedia, when you start bringing in pictures, the file sizes grow fast, and you could quickly go past that 5 megabyte limit. So the app cache method isn't really appropriate for something that's going to be using images or something that's going to be using PhoneGap plugins. Now, there's one little sort of side note on that, and that is that some browsers, Chrome for example, does allow JavaScript that will request more than 5 megabytes. For example, you can have a page that opens up and says, hey, this page would like to use, say, 100 megabytes of local storage. Is that okay? And the user can click yes to that. But not all browsers support that. So unless you know that they're going to be on a browser that supports that, I wouldn't count on it. So that's all there is there about the app cache. If you have other questions, please let me know. Oh, I see there's one about how is authentication handled with the app cache offline. Right now, that is something that you would have to write yourself. You could build it, but it's not built in. So let me go find another couple of questions. Oh, here's a good one that we can dive in, and I think we have enough time. It's one that we get a lot, but it's always worth repeating. And that is, if you're using a mobile UX component and the user logs in, where do you set the session variables so that I can filter out data after they've logged in? And I guess this is true of web applications too. So if you want to set it up so that someone logs in and only sees their data, how would you go about doing that?
Well, the best way is when they go through the login process, there is a server-side event called onLogin. So every UX has this server-side event called onLogin. And in onLogin, it fires when the user tries to log in, and it includes in this E variable all their information. And you can tell if they succeeded or not. So the first thing you check, say, they tried to log in and did it work or not. And from there, then, you can look inside E and you're going to know who the person is. And at that point, you can run any XBasic code you would like to query other data tables, etc., to set session variables or there. The only thing about it is that, remember, session variables are server-side variables. So if you're going to be connected, they're great. You can then use session variables anywhere you want. The only thing is session variables live on the server. So if you're building a mobile disconnected app, you don't want to depend on session variable because the problem is you don't have access to the server to get what that variable is. So you can use alternative where you can set JavaScript variables that are stored either in local storage or however you want to do it on the mobile side. So after you log in, you grab that information that's going to be needed, that kind of identity information, and then it's available in the rest of your components when you're disconnected. But again, if you're just doing a connected, then in the onLogin event, you just come in here and you make sure they've logged in has succeeded, then make your other calls to load up your session variables, and then you're on the way to go. And this can either be on your UX, wherever it happens to be, up to you. So how you implement it from that standpoint.
Terrific. Someone is asking, is it workable or possible to build an application, one application, that works both on desktop but also on mobile? They're two very different form factors. How would you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about that a lot, and the answer is absolutely you can. And what you can do is use what's called our responsive rules, responsive layout settings. And basically the UX component under properties has something called the responsive layout settings. And in there, you can add a rule and you can inspect and find out what is the environment I'm running on. So the system has the ability to the UX can say, hey, what am I running on? And so once you have done that and determined what it is, and you can create fairly sophisticated rules kind of scenario. You can say, are we in horizontal mode or are we in vertical mode, etc. Once you've done that, you can then add a action, and that action can say either modify properties or run some JavaScript to say, show them a different stuff. So you're right. In a situation like that, you have a pretty dramatically different layout. So it's possible you have two different layout, panel structures in your UX component. Often the reality is I often see people will build a UX for the desktop and then a UX for tablet and phone, which have very similar behaviors in there, because how people interact with them are usually fairly differently. I mean, desktop you're using a mouse and you're using keyboard. Out in the field with tablet there, it's all, point and pop-up keyboard, stuff like that. So I haven't seen too many people who try to do both a desktop and there. There's nothing to say you can't. But the way you could do that is you could run some JavaScript that says, show this panel set if you're on desktop, or show this panel set if you're on a mobile, and those then are optimized for those environments. Vice versa, you can use it where you can say, just create a UX component for a mobile environment, and then a UX for desktop, and then load the UX depending upon which one you want them to use. So the answer is you can do it. The question is it more work than just creating two different UXs and presenting them depending on the environment there? But Alpha allows you the option, whatever you want to, and you want to use the responsive layout genie as that mechanism because it can detect the environment it's on and thus trigger the information about, like for instance, you can even now set values in the control bar. So depending on what, like if I'm in, and that's what I was talking about before, this is very cool. You could have a control bar that looks one way with a certain set of icons when you are in vertical mode or like on a phone, and then you could have a setting that says if I'm on a tablet or in horizontal mode, I want to show more icons because I have more space available. So instead of having them on that drop down, I can actually put them on the bar so they're immediately available. So that's where you can use this. You can say, hey, if I'm in horizontal, set some values in the control bar so now I show more icons. But that's the overall method is under properties. Let me show you again where you get that. Is properties, responsive layout settings. You add the rule, and in here you insert the, detecting the environment, and it describes how to do that up there. And then once you've added the rule, you add the action, and the action can be JavaScript or set the active layout in the list control, etc., active layout in the control bar, etc. So this allows you to then on the fly detect, even if I go from, like if the user goes from horizontal to vertical, it's going to detect that and fire this action that then allows you to modify the behavior to use that. So again, doable, up to you to kind of play with it and see, does it make more sense to break it into two different UXs or keep it in one and have it in two separate panel layouts that you display depending on the environment that they happen to be in at that time.
That's great, thank you. Just a question about the Alpha Cloud, and the question is, how much work is it to set up an Alpha Cloud and to deploy to the Alpha Cloud compared to, say, the current, he says hoops and hurdles, that's almost fair, that it takes to do, say, an IIS or a standard Alpha Anywhere application setup where you actually have to go and install the software and enter serial numbers and do configuration. And the answer is the Alpha Cloud is much, much easier. Basically, because Alpha Cloud does all the setup for you and then basically just hands you back a username and password, that's really all you have to enter in, that and an application name. into the development environment in order to push your application up onto the cloud. It's really a piece of cake. We're still in beta on Alpha Cloud, so if you'd like to try that out for yourself, we're willing to give you some free space and check it out. I've really enjoyed using it for DevCon 2016. We used the cloud to deploy the scheduling app that people use to see the schedule for Alpha DevCon. So if you're interested in that, send an email, not to guides this time, but send it to sales@alphasoftware.com and say, hey, I'd like to participate in the Alpha Cloud beta. There's no charge for that. You just need to be a current subscribing member. Otherwise, your software won't support that feature. Here's an interesting one. Where's the best documentation or sample documentation for the A5W scripting tags?
Oh, well, first and foremost, now more and more, you can just go to help. Let's see, where's my open documentation? That'll open us up to the, that's opening up there, to documentation.alphasoftware.com. And this is the official repository of all documentation here. And let me go here. I wonder if we got something like there. Language tabs. No, that's language tabs. I'm not sure if there's a single, but I'm not sure if I'm answering that correctly. Beyond our documentation side, the A5 tags themselves, by the way, let me just go ahead and show you there. I'll create a new A5W page right here. And then blank page. And then once it opens up in a moment there, I'll go right here and I'll put there and I'll put a insert XBasic and I'll go hello there. So I'm just putting in a little piece of code. The little question mark spits out that information. And so you can see the tags are actually just left caret, percentage A5, and then to close it, it's percentage right caret, and then everything in between is just XBasic. So any XBasic code, to a large degree, will run within that area there. I'm not sure if there's other tags that are interested, but that's the only tags I'm aware of to kind of designate what's alpha code and is available. So you may, if you have a follow-up questions, please put it in there.
Yeah, put it in, or if we don't, because we're coming to the end of our time. Actually, if you go into the documentation system, there's a place for feedback. Just want to show that off real quick. That is monitored by a team of 3 people, and we usually write back within often less than an hour. So if there's something that should be documented that you can't find, just report an issue with documentation, and we'll either say, yeah, it's not there, but here's the answer to your question, or we'll point you in the right place.
Yeah, and thank you. We really want to make this super awesome, and the way we do that is if someone has a question, we want to get that answer to them immediately. And if it's hard to find, that's a deterrent, and we want to know that. So guys, give us your feedback. We really, 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 and guys and gals, really want that feedback because it really allows us to understand the weaknesses in the system. Although they're very few, they're awesome. It's excellent. But so we can improve it because the better this. We were on a marketing meeting earlier today, and I had a suggestion in terms of some video links and things like that. And the team is very earnest about taking that input and saying, how can we make it even clearer and simpler for our developers to find what they need so they can keep moving forward. So as you said, Dave, it's right there on all of them. If it's an issue with the page itself, like a problem you see, or if it's like, I can't find this, let us know.
Yep. Exactly. Thank you very much. Just another quick cloud question. Someone said, is it possible to use the Alpha Cloud as the server for a mobile application? In other words, the thing that loads the app onto the device, and the answer is yes. That was another example that we had used during the DevCon 2016. It was a mobile app that you could use that way. And that also means, yeah, if you want to do a PhoneGap shell deployment or all that, you absolutely can do that as well. So that's that. And again, if you want to play around with it free of charge, send an email to sales@alphasoftware.com. Tell me you'd like to be a beta user for the Alpha Cloud. We have a couple more questions, but they're a little bit more involved. Also, I've gotten back a quick response here from Sarah Mitchell, who is in charge of documentation, who said that there is more documentation on the article on tags, but she's looking at it right now, and she says it does look like it's a little bit hard to search for. So if you could, to the person who asked the question, if you could just send an email either to guides@alphasoftware.com or directly to the documentations through the documentation system, we'll show you how to find that. So I believe that is what we can cover for today. Next Wednesday, I just want to let you know of a quick scheduling change. Instead of our normal Q&A session, we're going to be doing a show and tell type session with Hyatt Communications. We'll be showing off a large application that they had rolled out, a mobile application, to help them keep track of workers who are putting up cell towers and cell networks over in Africa. Very interesting stuff. And I'm sure you want to see it. You're going to get a separate invitation for that. That's for next week. The week after will be Selwyn's Control Bar webinar. And then we will begin to resume our sort of normal Q&A sessions. But in the meantime, please do send any questions that you may have to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, @alphasoftware.com, and we will do our best to answer them and bring them up at future sessions. So thank you very much. Thanks, Dan, for presenting. And we hope to see you guys at a future webinar. Take care and goodbye.